you know, I guess if we are playing a true mixed strategy, we shouldn't always bet just because we have the back door. We should put some of the back doors in our checking range as well. So you know, ace king is actually strong enough to check back the flop and even call a turn bet, so it's a reasonable hand to put in our flop checking back range. Having said that, even though if we bet we don't really get called by worse, we don't fall that better, betting is still quite clearly plus EV. 8-4 of spades, I'm just going to complete here, just play this family pot. Same with the 7-9 actually. I think one thing that players often miss actually as well is completing the small blind against fish. I mean, you just want to play as many pots as you can in these particular spots. So we flop the combo draw with the 8-4 of spades. I'm just going to check here because I think we easily have enough equity to check call, and I think leading could be problematic on this particular texture because I think we're just not getting folds. So I'd rather just keep the pot kind of small and try and hit my draw here. You know, we could actually just go ahead and stack off, which would probably be okay because we do have a super strong combo draw. But I slightly prefer playing my hand this way. I mean, it saves a ton of variance, and yeah, I just think it's a better line to take, especially when you have to factor in the amount of rake you're paying. Okay, so it's a little bit of a tricky spot on the turn because, you know, if the board hadn't paired, this would obviously be a snap call. I think it's actually a lot closer now because, you know, it was a four-way pot. Someone could easily have a set, and we could easily be drawing pretty dead here. So, you know, I actually think this is very close between a call and fold in this particular spot now. You know, even if we make a flush, we could just be getting stacked by a full house or high flush. In other words, we can no longer be super comfortable about just stacking off when we hit our draw on the river. So actually, it's you know, it's probably fine to fold in this spot. You know, I wouldn't hate a call. I just think you save yourself a lot of headaches in the long run if you make a tight fold in that spot. Obviously, if the board hadn't paired, I would not even think about folding in that spot. It doesn't really make any sense. Okay, so I was talking about like stars versus 888, and I think another difference we have to factor in as well is like stars take a lot less rake and they have a slightly better VIP system than 888, which I think is why the games are a bit tougher. They attract their regulars a bit more. You know, regs don't want to play at 888 for a few different reasons. You know, one is the VIP system isn't as good in terms of rake back percentage. Also, there's caps. I mean, there's a reason why I'm playing 2 tables and not 4 tables here. It's because Snap Poker is capped to 2 tables at 888. I can actually play 2 of 5 and 2 of 10 and L, so you can like play 2 tables at each limit if you wanted. So I suppose you could actually play you know, more tables of Snap. The reg tables are capped at 6, and again, like, they've designed it that way to really discourage regulars from playing here. But if you can overlook the annoying table caps and the VIP system, which is not great, you'll find that the games are like literally twice as soft as playing on stars. And it's not just 5 and L. You know, even like 50 and L, 100 and L, you can still get some pretty insane win rates. Like you can actually get 12 BB per 100 at 100 and L on Snap Poker because the regs are just nowhere near as good as they are on stars. So if you can overcome the fact that you're forced to play very few tables, you can have a pretty nice win rate at this place. But they've definitely designed it to attract recreational players and discourage the regs from joining. Queen Jack probably is a defender in the big blind in this spot. King 4, I don't really like the situation. I'm just going to raise and then probably give up. I mean, we have some back doors and I think we have some fold equity. Okay, so we flop back queen here. I'm just going to check. I mean, there's definitely an argument for donk betting here. I don't really have much of a donk betting range heads up without any stats. If I had a HUD, I might think about having a donk betting range here. King 4 is interesting because we do actually pick up a pair. I'm actually just going to go ahead and barrel here. I think it's like very thin and we could just be donating money to ace X a decent amount. But also in this range you can have stuff like king queen, king 10 for example. You know, some jack X hands which you might decide to fold. We have a chance to improve on the river. Just gonna check back this river, although there's an argument for bluffing. It's just whether we fold him off an ace X hand, and you know we should fold him off an ace X hand, but then again he doesn't have a full stack. I don't really know if he's actually folding. Queen Jack, we're just gonna lead the river for value. If he has ace king, yeah, I think especially, I don't know whether he knows about blockers, but especially with the ace of clubs blockers, like he probably won't fold. I don't know whether he actually assimilates that information into his decision whatsoever, but if you don't know what blockers are, it means that obviously since he has the ace of clubs, we cannot have as many flush draw combos. But yeah, anyway, the point wasn't to like fold him off ace X hands. That's not really what we expect to do at these limits. Okay, so we ISO raise ace queen here. This guy decides to min lead. If you'd bet a regular sizing, I would just fold here. I don't think it's going to be correct to fold for 10 cents into a pot that's now 67. I don't want to raise either because I don't want to stack off here, which leaves calling, which has a few issues itself because we have this guy to act behind us who could raise. I think by this stage folding's good. There's a chance we're drawing dead. We have 12 outs, so we have 6 outs even, so we have about 12% chance to hit on the river. I think it's just not quite working out for us here to call again, so folding's fine. If you have any questions about 6 max cash games, keep them coming. Interested to answer any questions about anything related to 6 max no limit hold'em basically. So think of this as your opportunity to get some free coaching. At some point we'll be having a look at some RFI ranges. As mentioned, we're going to start out very simple in terms of the theory content of this stream. And as mentioned, this is more of a test stream than anything. Like I would say, like the real version of this is going to start next week, and it'll be properly advertised as well. Because some of you might realize the stream was actually meant to be a little bit later than this. But hopefully it will be at this time. It started about an hour and 40 minutes ago, so it'll be that time next Sunday. Hopefully, just need to chat a little bit with the Poker VIP guys just to confirm that that's the time of the stream. Hopefully it'll be a bit more advertised next time. So think of this as the test stream. We won't do any super intensive theory discussions. We will look at some raise for stem ranges, but starting from next week there's going to be an itinerary that we're going to slowly work through. So if you attend each of these streams, by the time we've done 10 or 20 streams, then hopefully your 6 max no limit hold'em cash game should be in pretty reasonable shape. So Queen 9, we obviously want to have a pretty reasonable 3-betting range, big blind versus small blind. A little bit concerned about the pot size opening. I'm not sure if that's like standard or anything, so I'm going to make a tight fold in this spot, but normally Queen 9 offsuit would easily be in my 3-betting range, especially if he makes it like 2.5x or 3x open. Definitely want to try and keep giving these guys notes as well, especially if you're playing someone with no HUD. Then obviously tagging players becomes more important, and this is especially true if the player pool is pretty small, like it is here in the snap games, because like one of the issues if you're playing like the Stars Zoom stream, for example, is you're playing 5NL Star Zoom or 10NL Star Zoom. You take like a really detailed note on someone, you just won't see him again for like 200 hands or something. So it has limited application taking these notes, whereas if you're playing somewhere where regularly the player stream is 50 players or 100 players, then taking notes suddenly has much more application because you are going to see those guys again. It also makes sense. Obviously there's no HUD here on 888, but that doesn't mean the hands aren't being tracked. So it makes sense to take some of the higher volume players and use the versus player or opponents tab in Hold'em Manager 2, and work out how are your opponents playing, how can you exploit them. So just because I don't have the HUD at my table now doesn't mean I can't harness a decent amount of power of my HUD by running some analysis in Hold'em Manager 2 with the hands that I've imported. So here on the King Queen 8, I think betting is usually better than checking in this spot. It's not really a value bet as such on this kind of texture, but I think it's just better to bet and hopefully take it down rather than give free cards. We could occasionally get caught by some worse flush draws or something, so there's some additional expectation there. I think versus pot size donk bet there's just absolutely nothing we can do. There aren't really any cards that can improve us on the next street, so it doesn't really make sense to stick around in that hand. Jacks, usually going to be a 3-bet for value, especially if the button opens. If the button folds, then okay, we're definitely going to 3-bet against a min raise. Should be pretty standard. He doesn't have a full stack, so it could potentially be a fishy player. Let's see. This guy limps, so we'll give him a tag. I'm probably not going to defend the 10-5 offsuit though. Just wait for a stronger hand against even the weaker players. Aces, so hopefully we can get some deep stacks in here. Let's see. So I'm going to automatically open raise slightly larger than my regular sizing, and I see the stacks are deep and we have a premium. So good exploitative adjustment here. We're not committed, and the reason we're not committed here is to do with the stack depth. But obviously, we're looking at least 2 or 3 streets of value. The board texture doesn't change, but we still have to give a reasonable amount of credit to check raises. The 8's probably a good card in that there's stuff like King Queen who counterfeit now. We're not worried about him hitting 2 pair on the river because aces and 8s is going to beat like any 2 pair he could spike. But then of course you could actually just have you know, an 8x hand. You know, he overcalled 3 ways, so he can definitely have stuff like you know, 7-8 suited in his range, for example. Yeah, so now we're in a very tough spot. Okay, so you know, if he's playing a balanced range here, he should actually have you know, stuff like ace jack of clubs in his turn check raising range. He should have some decent combo draws. But in reality, he's probably not playing a balanced strategy here. He's actually just weighted towards 8x hands, I would imagine. I don't think he has too much stuff like kings or queens he would squeeze, and I don't know whether he would now raise king queen for value now that the 8s has counterfeited his hand. But then again, it's only aces he's been counterfeited against. Then again, we could have an 8x hand potentially. So what I'm getting at is I think he's probably weighted towards value here, and it's probably a good spot to make an exploitative fold. We also have to think a little bit about stack leverage as well. You know, even if we call here, what do we do if he overbet shoves the river for a deep stack? So it's probably another good spot to make a pretty tight fold at these limits. You know, assuming he just calls, then we should definitely be value betting the river against any king x hands, king queen, any river 2 pairs, for example. So 7-8 just going to fold. 4-3 could definitely open this from MP. I'm just going to make a tight fold. Okay, so we'll play a few more hands and then we'll bring up Flopzilla and we're going to review some raise first in ranges for 6 max games. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, then please post them in the chat. Okay, so I'm just going to fire up Flopzilla. Okay, so I'm slowly transferring these ranges from my Equilab, because I actually have all of my pre-flop ranges saved in Equilab, but I think I'm not actually allowed to use Equilab on the stream for advertisement reasons. So I'm slowly transferring all of my ranges over into Flopzilla. So we're going to have a look at some opening ranges. So what I'll do is I'll set out next big blinds, and then we'll spend 15-20 minutes reviewing some opening ranges. Then we'll get back to the grind for a bit. So 10-9 offsuit we should defend just due to the price we're getting. Obviously it's not the greatest hand to have, but okay, so we flop an open-ended, but it's not a great open-ended because obviously if we do actually hit a king, there's going to be a 4 straight out there, so we don't have great implied odds in this particular spot. We could also just actually be drawing to a chop because our opponents could have king 10 or something, which is obviously bad if we hit an 8 and our opponent has king 10, because then we can end up losing a decent chunk of money. Having said that, I'm not ready to just let this hand go at this stage. I think check calling the flop is probably going to be correct still. We would just prefer it if the ace wasn't there and we had like the jack, queen, 9, 10 draw instead. So here we have to call 23. Yeah, I mean, we might have a marginal set mine. I really don't mind keeping my range to like 6s or 7s plus for my set mining range, otherwise I think we end up calling too many 3 bets in that particular spot. So I think Killjoy 1987 says, what stakes are you playing? Well, right now I'm playing 5NL, but regularly I play 200 or 500 games, 6 max cash at the moment mainly, although I do like to play some PLO 8 also. The idea is we're doing like a bankroll challenge, so we're going to start at the lower limits, and hopefully by the time we've had 10 or 20 streams, then we should be at significantly higher stakes than we are now, but we'll see how it progresses. Cashflick says, are your walkthrough ranges special for the smaller sizings, 2.2 to 2.5? Okay, so I don't think it matters too much, actually. I mean, theoretically, if we open raise smaller, we can play a wider range. But generally, I make it around about 2.2x is my standard sizing when I use those ranges. But obviously, I vary that heavily on the table, so yeah, somewhere between 2.2 to 2.5, the ranges should work well with. But that doesn't mean they're going to be really terrible if you use them with a 3x raise first in range or a min raise raise first in range. I think on the 10 here, we're just going to fold the 9-10. We get a reasonable price, but the problem is our pots are not great. I mean, if we think about it here and we imagine we have, like 8 outs or something, we hit on the river 16% of the time. However, we'll be investing 25% of the pot, so we don't quite get the pot odds we need to call here. So really, it comes down to what kind of implied odds we can expect to get on the river. And generally speaking, if an 8 comes, we don't have great implieds because our opponent could have king 10. And if a king comes, we don't have great implieds because either our opponent's going to be chopping with us, or he's just not going to pay us off because he sees us for straight out there. So we don't have the pot odds, and our implied odds don't look great. So it's perfectly fine to just go ahead and fold the turn in that spot. But yeah, the walkthrough ranges should do well for any particular limit. You can actually download my ranges for Equilab. So it's not necessary to import them, put them all in manually as such. But I'm going to be transferring them to Flopzilla for use in this series. Cashlick says most people say that 2.2 is really small, especially from all positions. Yeah, I mean that's true. And let's just say, in my experience, I don't think that changing your open raise size is going to drastically increase your win rate. So I don't think like you could take a player who's opening for 3x and he's break even, and then you tell him to open raise for 2.2x, and then suddenly he's winning at 5 big blinds per 100. I just don't think open raise size really influences our win rate that much, especially if we're playing 100 big blind stacks. The most important thing is going to be what happens post flop. So I don't really think it makes a huge difference. However, I do think there's a number of advantages to open raising smaller, and this is the main reason why I pick small sizings. Probably one of the main reasons is it's aside from the fact we get a better price in our seal, assuming that our opponent's defending ranges are static, it's just a lot easier for us to defend against 3-bets. If we open raise large and our opponent 3-bets large, it's very difficult to call a 3-bet. The stack to pot ratio is just not going to be conducive for playing in 3-bet pots. So I mean, I definitely like to open raise small for that reason, if not anything else. But if I've got like pocket aces under the gun and there's a huge fish in the blinds, then I'm not going to be open raising to 2.2. I'm going to be open raising to 3x or 4x potentially. So first, I don't think if you were to have a static raise sizing, I don't think it makes a difference that much whether it's 2.2x or 3x. But I do think having exploitative sizing to certain spots could potentially boost our win rate. So as I mentioned earlier, if we've got aces on the button and there's a fish in the big blind, then I don't think 2.2 is how you maximize your win rate. So over the long run, using exploitative sizings pre-flop could boost your win rate. But assuming we're playing a static strategy where we use the same opening, I really don't think there's going to be a huge difference between whether you have 2.5 or 3x open. So if you personally feel more comfortable playing 3x opens, then you should do that. I like to play a small open for the reasons I've discussed, but I'm not saying like a 3x open is wrong or anything. I mean, I do think we've advanced past a stage where we would actually open raise to 4x on the button, and that used to actually be pretty standard. If you check out some guides for like 6-7 years back, you'll see recommendations that our open raise size is 4x from every position. Even, especially from the small blind, like people would say, we're playing a strong range in the small blind, we should open raise larger, we should open raise really tight. But now things have completely gone, 180-degree flip, because nowadays people open small from the small blind and they're open raising super aggressively. Some guys are opening like 80% of hands from the small blind. So things have changed a lot, and the general progression is the sizings are getting smaller. Like that's a general trend we can see if we look back to like 6, 7, 8 years ago, is that sizings online are just getting smaller. So in the past, someone would open raise to like 4x, someone would 3-bet them to like 15 big blinds, and in some extreme cases, like the 4-bet would be an all-in. Whereas now, guys are even like getting into serious discussions about min 5-betting ranges, because if open raise is 2 big blinds and someone 3-bets to 6 big blinds, and someone 4-bets to 12 big blinds, then someone can like 5-bet to 25 big blinds, which is kind of the same size as what a 4-bet is in some games, or it's actually smaller than what a 4-bet sizing used to be like quite a few years back. So the general trend is sizings are getting smaller all of the time. It's about getting the best price on your bluff and leaving decent stacks behind for post-flop play. That's the general trend. Okay, so please keep the questions coming. We're going to take a break from the action now. We're just going to review some raise first in ranges. So possibly you've already seen these. What I've done, actually, an interesting variant we have now, given that we're using Flopzilla and not Equilab, for those of you who've seen my walkthrough ranges. If you haven't, then don't worry. in some ways this is actually going to be more interesting than looking at equilab ranges, because what we can actually do using Flopzilla is we can break down some of the hands and say that opens some percentage of the time. So anything you see, I wonder if I can make this a little bit bigger. Let's see if I can make it any bigger. No, actually the whole cards grid does not get any bigger, but hopefully you can see that just fine. So anything that's marked in green, we can see that we're opening that some percentage of the time, but not all of the time. So anything that doesn't have a green dot is going to be part of the standard raise first in range, which is going to be about 13%. But you can see we've actually got 14.4% of hands here. And this is part of the reason why, even though I recommend a 13% RFI from UTG, actually when I review people's databases, I don't expect to see 13% RFI. I expect to see higher. I expect to see like 14.5. And the reason is we should be expanding our opening range based on the hands, based on who's at the table. And we could even open some of the weaker hands with some frequency, but not open them all of the time. So if you've seen the walkthrough ranges, the first thing I've done is I've added ace 2 to ace 5 suited as standard raise first in. So in the original walkthrough ranges, these hands weren't here. I've added them because I think they're perfectly fine, as a standard raise first in. What we could potentially do is we could say, actually, we're not going to open them 100%. We're going to open them, 50% or something. That would be fine as well. So we could, settle those as 50% RFI. That would be completely fine. So sometimes we open them, sometimes we don't. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. The hands ace 9, ace 8, ace 7, ace 6, these are the ones that I don't open raise by default, but I will be opening them if there's a weaker player in the blind. So I actually recommend opening these if there are weaker players at the table. So I've assigned them as a frequency of 15%. Basically how it's going to work is some situations we'll never open them because we'll be playing on a table full of tough regs, and then in some situations we'll always open them because there's a weaker player in the blind. So I've assigned these as 15% frequency, but in practice it might be higher than 15%. I don't know the answer to that exactly. I've added 10-8 suited here as well as an open raise from under the gun, situational depending on who's in the blinds. Same with 5-4, 6-5 suited. I think I may have even included like 5-4 suited as a standard raise first in part of the walkthrough ranges, but I actually recommend that we open these based on the table. So 5-4 suited is not going to make us a huge amount of money, so again I've assigned that a 15% frequency. So anything that doesn't have a green tag is something that we should just be raising all of the time. So ace jack offsuit standard open regardless of who's at the table, for example. Any suited Broadway standard open from UTG regardless of who's at the table. Any suited connect 6-7 suited plus, jack 9 suited as well should be standard. You'll notice 2, 3s and 4s have got the green tag as well, so I don't necessarily recommend we open pocket 2s from UTG as standard. Again, it depends on the table. If there's weaker players at the table, go ahead and open 2s, 3s, 4s, and it's probably going to be a pretty decent option. But we don't have to include these as standard. So this is the raise first in from UTG. If you have any questions on this range, please post in the chat. But you can see by default, if we take off all the green tags, it's about 13%. But when we add all these green tags with some of the hands we'd open situationally, then we can expect, if we did some database analysis, that RFI from UTG would actually be slightly above 13% and maybe be 14 or 14.5%. Okay, so moving on to MP. So we've done the same thing in MP. Like we have our standard raise first in range, and then we've included some green marks for hands which are slightly outside our opening range, but we should open these based on who's at the table. So starting with Broadways, we have ace 10 offsuit and king jack offsuit as standard, so anything stronger than these is fine. We now have all of the suited aces, the standard opens from MP, like all of the time. All pocket pairs are standard opens. The hands which are slightly outside our standard MP open range, and the hands that we could open situationally, we have king 9 suited, queen 9 suited, pretty reasonable. 6-4 suited, 7-5 suited, 6-8 suited. Generally speaking, if we want to expand our our MP raise first in range, the hands we use are the hands that have good playability but are not dominated. Like we don't want to start expanding our range with stuff like a6 offsuit because we're just going to end up in too much trouble post flop. I mean, if we look at the equity by comparing something like a6 offsuit and 6-8 suited, a6 offsuit clearly has much more equity, but what this should tell us is that our equity is not the most important thing. Actually, the most important thing is our playability. So something like 6-8 suited can flop reasonably well. Obviously it's not a great hand, but it doesn't end up dominated. So if we flop an 8 or something, we don't need to worry too much about our opponent having a better 8. So let's move on to cutoff. Done the same thing here again. So in terms of frequency, you can see cutoff, raise first in. So if you've got the walkthrough range, you'll see that default raise first in from cutoff should be about 26% or something. But again, I don't necessarily expect to see 26% when I check people's databases, because situationally we should be opening wider in some spots. 26% is just what we open by default. Especially if the button is playing very, very tight, we should be expanding our cutoff, raise first in ranges. And you can see the hands tagged in green are some of the best hands to do it with. So, I don't recommend opening offsuit aces from the cutoff by default, but assuming the button is playing pretty tight, then we can include these in our raise first in ranges. We can see by default we should open something like king 6 suited plus, but any suited king could be an open depending on the situation. Same with queen 4, queen 5, queen 6, jack 6, 10 6, 9 6 suited, 5 8 suited, 7 4 suited. We could potentially expand our range with these hands, based on who's at the table. So maybe if we review our database, we should have slightly above 26%. Maybe it should be more like 28.8%, or maybe not quite this high, because as mentioned, we've just estimated the frequencies we would be opening these hands outside of our standard range, and we really don't know for certain what the frequency will be. It depends on which sites we're playing at, whether we're table selecting, etc. Because if you're playing a Zoom game, you'll have a very average amount of these hands that you would open raise outside of your standard raise first in range. But if you are playing regular tables and you're playing against a whole bunch of fish, then you literally could be opening way more hands than 28.8% on those specific tables. So if you're regularly table selecting for fish, then your raise first in range could become significantly higher than someone else who is playing Zoom games. And it wouldn't necessarily be that one player is opening too wide and the other player's not. It's just simply that they're meeting different situations. So what I've done with the button, because it gets a little bit tricky now on the button, because one thing we're probably aware of, anything could potentially be a raise first in from the button. So the first thing I've done is I've just put a standard button raise first in range in here, not including any of the extra hands we could potentially be opening. So you can see this is actually a 48.4% range in this spot. So this is what we should be opening by default against unknown blinds. But what I've also done is I've made another button range where I've included the hands we could potentially be opening based on the table. So you can see that actually we now have everything selected. This is 100% of hands, but since some of the hands are weighted by frequency, you can see like some of these have like 10%, the green ones have 10% open, the grey ones have 4%, and again these are estimated frequencies, they're probably not accurate. You can see that now it's not actually 100% range, it's actually 52.7% range. So we've expanded our button range in certain spots, but as you're probably aware, like in some games we can actually end up having 100% of raise first ins on the button. So when we do our database review, we might think that when we check out our button raise first in range that it should look something like this and be 48.4%, but in reality the frequency should look something more like this. Should be probably significantly over 52%. I would say it should probably be like 55% actually. So if that's the case, that should tell us that we've been under generous when applying the frequency with which we play these hands. We're going to get back to some tables soon, although unfortunately we've lost our deep stacks now. So we can see that we've probably not included as many combinations of these weaker hands as we should have, because we're probably looking for a button RFI frequency of about 55%. Small blind. First of all, this is the standard raise first in from the small blind, including some hands that we definitely could mix into our play regardless of who the opponent is. For example, if you've got the walkthrough range, you'll see that A7 offsuit is what's recommended, A7 offsuit plus, but I don't think it's wrong to occasionally open some weaker aces from the small blind, so I've assigned them a 50% frequency in this spot, and you can see this equates to a 36.5% range in this particular case. So then again, why is it that many players have 40% RFI if you check out their database for raise first in the small blind? Well, again, we've got this other range here where we've assigned all of the hands, because potentially anything can be an open raise in the small blind if the big blind's folding enough. So as a rough guide, if our opponent has a big blind fold to steal, big blind fold to small blind steal of above 60%, we can be open raising any two cards. And that's how we're going to end up getting small blind RFI range of more like 40% or even 50% in some cases. So you can see now, even though we have all hands selected in this spot, actually equates to just a 40.5% range, and could potentially be wider than this depending on, again, whether we play zoom games or whether we table select or not. Because obviously if we table select games where there's always a tight player in the big blind, then we're just going to be stealing with a much higher frequency. I've definitely seen guys who have in their database something like 80% RFI from the small blind, which personally I think is probably a bit too high, but it's difficult for me to say because it really depends on the situation, depends on the site players are playing against, how wide players generally defend their big blind versus the small blind open. So these are the ranges. I'll just walk through them one more time. If you have any questions on the RFI ranges or RFI sizings or RFI strategy, then now would be the time to post them in the chat. So maybe if you are interested in keeping these ranges, maybe you could take screenshots of these. So this is RFI from UTG. So we're going to move on again to RFI from MP, which looks something like this. RFI from cutoff looks something like this. So again, you can see that some of the hands have the green tags, which means we sometimes open them, but not always. Then we'll start off with the standard versions of the button and the small blind against unknown opponents. So RFI on the button is this, so that's a 48.4% range in this particular case. Then we'll load up the small blind range, which should be about 36%, 36.5% here in this case. And then we're going to add the attempt at being realistic with our button raise twisting range. So you can maybe screenshot these next if you're interested in keeping these ranges. You can see here everything's selected. It really just depends what frequency we're opening them with. So the hands with the green tag are being opened slightly more frequently than the hands that have a grey tag in this particular spot. And then finally small blind, the realistic version of the small blind range, which again includes any two cards. It's just a case of what kind of frequency they're being opened with. So you can see the hands with the green tag are being opened, well obviously the hands without a tag are being opened 100%. The green hands are being opened slightly more frequently. The hands with the grey dot are being opened less frequently. The hands with this tiny orange dot are being opened the least frequently. So for example, maybe big blind folds a bit too much. We might expand our small blind range, raise first in range to include something like Queen 6 offsuit, but we wouldn't necessarily open something like Jack 6 offsuit. But when the guy starts folding way too much, then we start including anything potentially like 7-3 offsuit, for example. Okay, so we've looked at the raise first in ranges. Probably we're going to be talking about cold calling ranges and maybe also 3-betting ranges next time. And of course we're going to be breaking it down by position. So obviously our range versus one position will not be the same as our range versus another position. So we'll be having a look at that next time. Yep, so any questions, please post them in the chat. And if there's no questions, then we're going to get back to playing our snap tables for a bit. We'll also be doing some cool stuff with Flopzilla a bit later in the series as well. Obviously we're just using it for very basic things right now, which is storing ranges. But as the series progresses, we're going to be doing some more advanced stuff where we check out which ranges hit which textures, for example. I mean, even these ranges we can see how frequently the range hits a texture, which is interesting. For example, this small blind raise twisting range hits 30.4% of the time. If we compare that to our default small blind range, it'd be interesting to see if there's a huge difference. So you can see, there's not a huge difference, but this range hits slightly more often, as we'd imagine, because it doesn't have stuff like 7 deuce offsuit in it, for example, 31.7% of the time. The range that usually hits the most is UTG, because it's the strongest. So if we check out something like UTG, we'll see it hits 38.3% of the time, and then generally it gets progressively lower depending on how wide our range is. So MP will probably hit a bit less. So it hits about 35.5% of the time. Cash-Clicks is very nice, amazing functionality of the software. Yeah, Flopzilla is very good actually, and it's not too expensive in terms of how much poker software goes for, because I think poker players have a tendency to overprice their software and their ebooks and everything, and the general argument is, okay, players are going to use this to make more money, so therefore they should pay $200 for my software because they're going to use it to make millions over the next few months, so therefore I can charge extortionate amounts. But I think Flopzilla is actually very good for what it does. You can buy Flopzilla license for $35, which is just lifetime usage including upgrades. So I actually think, as far as poker software goes, it's pretty reasonably priced, and it does have pretty good functions. Actually, it's very useful for analyzing how ranges hit certain board textures. And there's other things as well. For example, having a look at which turn cards would be the best for us, which turn cards hit certain ranges the hardest. So very useful software, and I think at $35, I think it's pretty reasonable in terms of how software pricing generally goes. Because there's stuff that does similar things to this out there, which are at least double, basically. So I think it's pretty decent. AC08 says, "Hey, thanks for the stream, Reasel. It's 1 AM here, so I'm going to bed." Okay, thanks for joining us, ACY08. Would be nice to see you next Sunday at the same time, and we'll get into some more theory content. So thanks for coming. Hopefully, I'll see you next week. Okay, so let's get back to the tables. Unless anyone has any more questions related to 6 Max No Limit Hold'em, we're going to be playing for another hour or so, and then we're going to call it a stream for today. Okay, so let's fire up the 888 table. So we started this bankroll challenge with $70, so we're already up about 2 stacks, which is a good start. Let's see if we can avoid losing that back in the next hour or so. Hopefully we'll make a few more stacks, but time will tell. Okay, so table 1, this guy min raises. Probably don't want to be defending 5-3 offsuit. We do want to defend the big blind wide as discussed, but not quite this wide, so folding's good. 4-5 offsuit, standard fold. Same with king 2, standard folds on all tables so far. Ace 3 suited should be able to play this. Actually, normally I'd 3-bet if MP opens, but it's okay not to 3-bet 100% frequency. I'm a little bit concerned with the button, who has a short stack here, so I don't think it's an optimal spot to go for a 3-bet bluff. But actually, this is part of my standard 3-betting range against the MP open. Purely not going to do it because the button has like 20 big blinds in the stack, and I don't want to get jammed on, really. I think if we get jammed on, we're priced into calling, but I'd rather just not raise in the first place, because I don't really want to be stacking off for 20 big blinds with a suited ace if I can avoid it. So queen 3 is a fold. Kings, obviously we're going to raise this and hope to get the money in pre-flop. And I think given he has 60 big blind effective stacks, I think any overpair we flop is going to be hard to get away from regardless of the action. So the only flop we'd really think about folding is like an ace high flop post flop. And we still probably wouldn't fold directly on the flop. It would probably be on the turn that we ended up folding or something. I'm going to keep on tagging these players. This guy can have the tag for being a weaker player. 5-4, again, is perfectly reasonable call in this spot. It's right at the bottom of our calling range, so okay to fold some percentage of the time. But yeah, certainly any suited connector could be a cold call, button versus cutoff. I actually prefer to call these hands rather than 3-bet them. I have a tendency towards 3-betting high equity hands in position. So here we flop top pair, second kicker. I would actually check this board a decent amount because it's a reasonably dry texture. I like to defend my checking range. That becomes even more important at higher stakes. This guy looks like he might be a fish though, so I'm actually just going to value bet against him because he doesn't have a full stack. And fishy guys have a tendency towards 3-betting ace king pre-flop. I still would give a turn raise a ton of credit if he does raise, because he can easily just smooth call a set on that texture, and I definitely think he has 4s and 5s in his pre-flop range. 9-3 suited, I'm going to complete here, so it's marginal, but I do think it's good to stress the importance of completing quite wide in the small blind, especially if you're playing against weaker players, and generally you are if you get the opportunity to complete in the small blind, because it means someone's limped. So here with the gut shot and backdoor flush, a great spot to lead at limp pot. We should be leading aggressively in this spot. I'm going to barrel any club, obviously barrel a 6 for value. I'm not going to barrel a 2, I don't think it's one of the better cards for us. Although sometimes we can bluff river, it depends what his turn action is really. I'm just going to go for the check fold here. I don't think we are getting the right price or implied odds to call in this spot. And obviously we're not drawing to the nuts, which damages our implied. We spike at 6 and he ends up having 9-10 or something. So Cash Click says polarized versus recreational players. Can you be a bit more specific with your question, cash clicks? Because in general, in most situations, we should be merged against recreational players, actually, regardless of the spot. It's against regs we typically polarize, but I have a tendency towards merging 3-bets in position even against regs. I think it's much stronger than being polarized in position, just generally speaking. There's a number of reasons for that. So 3-betting, yeah. So I mean, that's an interesting topic, and we're going to get to it in later streams, but I'll give you the basic rundown of why I have a tendency towards 3-betting high equity hands in position rather than flatting. I suppose the simplest way to explain it is that when we have position post-flop in a 3-bet pot, we're going to realize that equity more frequently, so it's more relevant the equity we have, whereas out of position we'd prefer to 3-bet polarized with speculative hands in our range, because we're not going to realize equity as much, and it's more important that we have the ability to stay aggressive on various turn and river cards because we have some kind of speculative hand like a flush draw, etc. So in general, also something else to consider as well is generally speaking, the expectation of 3-betting any hand is going to be higher than the expectation of cold calling. You don't really need to do much intensive database work to find out that we make way more money when we 3-bet than we do by cold calling. So the general idea of the game is to get away with 3-betting as much as possible without overdoing it, because obviously, if we start 3-betting 100% range, then that's going to become somewhat obvious. That may not be the best strategy. But if we can get away with having a 10% 3-bet range, then we should try and use all of those opportunities to 3-bet. So I think just in general, high equity hands play better in position, whereas speculative hands have a tendency to play better out of position. And it basically all comes down to the fact that we can realize equity more frequently when we're in position. So having more equity is going to be a plus. We'll be talking about that in more depth in later streams. But if you have any specific questions on that exact topic, I'll be happy to answer them right now. So, wow, we just flopped the nuts. Okay, that's how we run. So obviously you're just going to bet for value, especially at these limits. I mean, if we start talking theory, then we should sometimes check call, sometimes check raise. But I think I'm just going to tend towards betting certain hands at this limit, which I might otherwise think about putting in my check range. But I think attempting to check some combos of flop straights for the purposes of range protection is just going to be a completely lost concept at these limits. Ace Jack, I just cold call in the big blind. Could definitely 3-bet against the min raise. I think both options are fine. Obviously not going to check fold this flop because we have top pair. Now we could even think about donk betting here actually, because I don't know how frequently he barrels this card. I mean, if we felt he didn't barrel this card very much, I mean, we don't really want to give him a free card here. I mean, we actually also, one thing to think about as well, and might not have a huge effect, is that if he did have a bluff range here, some of his bluffing range is going to be stuff like ace-x of spades, and we hold the ace-x of spades, so I think it's pretty reasonable just to go for 2 streets of it's somewhat thin value actually. We could be beat here some of the time, but I think just donk 2 barreling there is actually better than checking the turn and letting him check back potentially. Obviously 3-bet aces in position. I think one of the biggest arguments about the idea of having a slightly merged range in position is that certain hands, let's say MP opens and we 3-bet something like ace-10 offsuit, for example. It's too thin for value, but it's too strong to bluff. That kind of spot, or let's say ace-jack is maybe a better example, like against an MP open. Maybe it's a profitable call. Let's say something like ace-jack suited. Okay, I think ace-jack suited is the best example. So we're button, MP opens, we have ace-jack suited on the button. Now it's too weak to value 3-bet there. It's not a standard value bet if we're playing a 6-max strategy. And it is strong enough to cold call. So some people might say, well, we shouldn't really be bluffing with this hand. It's strong enough to cold call. Let's bluff with something that's not strong enough to cold call. But this is basically where my strategy deviates, because just because something is strong enough to cold call doesn't mean that cold calling is the best option with that particular hand. The expectation of 3-betting is going to be higher than flatting nearly always, so I'm going to tend towards doing that. Whereas the hands that play best as cold calls, generally, because obviously we can't 3-bet everything as we discussed, the hands that play best as cold calls are generally going to be the speculative hands, because speculative hands play better with a high stack to pot ratio. They also connect with a much higher degree of flops, so we have more opportunities to bluff raise our opponent, whereas the high equity hands don't really function that well as bluff raises post flop, because they have equity. That doesn't mean they have good playability. So I think it just makes sense to put a decent amount of speculative hands in a cold calling range, and 3-bet a decent amount of high equity hands in position. Specifically we're talking, because it does change when we're out of position. With the 7-4 here, I'm just going to bet for protection. And sometimes you can think about barreling the turn again, because it just comes back to the theme you mentioned about barreling merged against guys at these limits. So not necessarily having the same range that you would double barrel bluff against a reg. You might want to double barrel a slightly different range against a fish, basically. You want to be more merged. So against a reg, if you have something like 6 high with a backdoor flush draw, which you've turned, that's going to be a great hand to bluff against a reg, and you can follow up with some river barrels. If you're playing against a calling station fish who won't fold any of his jack high gut shots, then trying to 2-barrel a 6 high flush draw is going to be a train wreck, because your opponent is just never going to fold. He's just going to snap call you with his jack high gut shot. So hopefully we can see why against a reg our playability and potential is the most important, whereas against a fish you want to tend towards having a slightly merged range when we bluff post flop, when we're talking about double barreling. So in general, if we're playing against a fish, regardless of whether we're in position or out of position, we probably want to think about trying to merge our range. Whereas if we're playing against a reg, we probably want to have a polarized range when we 3-bet out of position, but we probably want to have a slightly more merged range when we 3-bet in position. There are of course some exceptions to this. This is not like a rule that always applies. So here with the 5s, I'm going to make one of my speciality bets, which we saw earlier in the session, and it worked out very well. So the idea here is our 5s is probably good. We're just betting for protection here. It's going to be a much stronger option than trying to check back in that spot. Actually, we'll come back and review this hand, and we'll probably review this 9-10 hand as well, because you're probably wondering why I'm betting so small on the turn. So I'm just going to check back here in the river and hope my top pair's good. Okay, so let's review those hands, because some interesting stuff happened there. I'm just going to fold the 6-4. Okay, so 5s. We talked about the previous underbet. We're going to talk about this underbet as well, because this kind of stuff is like crucial if you want to have a very high win rate. If you're happy to have 3 or 4 BB per 100, then that's fine. You don't need to worry about underbetting or overbetting. If you want to be one of these guys that has like 10 BB or more per 100 of these limits, then you have to really pay attention to bet sizing. So I just want to talk about why bet sizing with the 5s here is, well, I believe it's optimal. Obviously probably not perfectly optimal, because I don't think anyone is perfectly optimal, but so pre-flop we open raise from UTG. Min 3-bet, obviously we have to call here, try and flop a set. So actually we just want to take into account who decided to 3-bet pre-flop, which was the button. So he has the initiative, so at this stage guys could potentially check to the button even if they have a jack. So this guy decides to open fold, so he's obviously not very good. In fact, let's give him a tag, because obviously he can get to see a turn for free if he doesn't decide to open fold here. So the button decides not to c-bet. So that should tell us the button does not have usually a jack X, a flush draw, any overpair, any 4x. The button probably has something like suited ace or like ace 10 or something. He min 3-bet pre-flop, so he usually has something reasonable. But that could actually extend to stuff like suited connectors and 8-9 of hearts, for example. Anyway, he doesn't have a jack X or an overpair or a 4x the vast majority of the time. So when he doesn't bet as the pre-flop aggressor, this guy in the small blind now has the opportunity to bet his strong hands, because remember he maybe didn't bet them on the flop because he was checking to the pre-flop aggressor. So now if this guy has a flush draw, a 4x or a jack X, or like turn pocket 6 or something, he's now betting, and guess what, he checks. So we can now actually put him on a somewhat similar range. We're talking things like overcards, suited connectors, which are nearly always folding but actually have equity against us. This guy's got 9-10 of hearts, he's nearly always going to be check folding here. However, with 9-10 of hearts, he has 6 clean outs against us, and he has a 12% chance to hit on the river. If the other guy's got 6 clean outs against us, he also has 12% chance to hit on the river. So if we don't bet here, we're giving these guys 25% equity for free, and also potentially the ability to bluff us, because check calling here is kind of awkward. So in this particular spot, we know our opponent's range is very weak, And we know there's a very small possibility that maybe the button slow played something. Maybe he does have pocket jacks, or he has pocket fours or something, or he has ace four, you know, with trips. It's not going to happen very often. The majority of the time they don't have these hands as discussed. So we have options here, and again, as we mentioned earlier in the stream, the average player is going to look at this spot and say, I can either bet 2/3 pot here, or I can check. Neither of them seem that great actually. I don't know, I'll just check. So that's generally how the average thought process is going to go, and that's because we're not taking into consideration all the various options we can have in this spot. So let's analyze why checking and betting 2/3 pot don't really work very well here. 2/3 pot is okay actually. I mean, it's going to take the pot down a ton. The problem is, you know, if our opponent does have a slow play, then we're just investing way too much money. Or maybe he has something like pocket eights. You know, some of these hands are possible, like sevens, eights, nines, tens. Maybe these played passively. We're just going to be losing too much money here if we decide we're going to bet like 60 cents or something, or 50 cents. On the other hand, checking sucks because we're giving away 25% free equity in the spot, and we don't want to be doing that. So the perfect solution here is to underbet, because a number of good things can happen. I mean, firstly, if we bet, you know, 18 cents here, and our opponents both fold, well, that's amazing because we're betting such a small percentage of the pot. We're getting an amazing risk to reward in our bluff. So if both guys fold here, that's an absolutely amazing outcome for us. However, if they decide to call, we don't really mind either, because firstly, against such a small sizing, they could actually be calling with stuff like, you know, ace queen, for example, ace 10, like overcard hands. That's fine. We extract some value. That's okay. And also, if they do have something like pocket eights, which we're probably not going to fold at anyway, regardless of our sizing, we don't lose that much money. We only lose 18 cents in this spot. In other words, we get an amazing risk to reward ratio. We also extract value simultaneously, and we protect our hand. So, like, there's a number of reasons why this particular play is, you know, hugely more profitable than a large bet or a check. So hopefully that makes sense. And I think if you want to have a really high win rate at these limits, like, it's quite important to understand this concept, like when to underbet. So we don't just want to be betting, you know, between half pot and 2 pots. So if you have any questions, or you know, completely disagree, that's fine. Just post in the chat. You know, just list your reasons. Like, it's good to get some discussion going. So you know, I don't mind at all if you completely disagree with everything I've just said. That will just make for some interesting discussion. So or if you're not really 100% sure of the reasons why I did that, then you can post that in the chat as well. Or as mentioned, if you have any other questions related to you know, 6-max cash games in general, then I'll be happy to answer your questions. So here with the queen 8, I'm just going to donk bet. I don't think checking to the initial pre-flop player really applies in the limp pot. Okay, so the turn is the king of diamonds, which is a reasonable bluff card. I don't generally bluff here unless I have some kind of straight draw, or I have some kind of 1 diamond hand. So I'm just going to stick to my default strategy here and go for a check fold on this particular turn card. King 9, I'm just going to give up. Okay, so he min bets, which is a little bit awkward. 5-3, I'm just going to fold on the button. Obviously I hate folding for 5 cents. It's like he's betting 1/6 pot, but then again, what do I really hope to achieve by calling here? I'm just going to fold. 10 deuce of hearts. Again, I'm going to carry on with the trend of completing in the small blind here, because the original limp is probably a fish, the big blind is probably a fish as well, so you know, we should be able to actually make some money with this kind of hand. I'm going to lead. Again, the limp pot, you know, checking to the original pre-flop better doesn't really apply here. 7s is just a set mine. That's a pretty bad flop for 7s. I think, you know, this is one of the flops where we can just go ahead and check fold. I mean, keep in mind that we have a decent amount of hands which connect with this kind of texture, so it's not a big deal if we end up check folding 7s. He checks back. I'm just going to go for a bet. It's like bluff stroke protection in this spot. It's mainly a bluff, but you know, he could call with like a king high diamond draw and then give up on the river or something. So you know, there is a value betting element to it. Like my 7s could easily be good here because he usually bets like any 10x or 9x on the flop, any draw. So the only thing I really lose to is an ace-x that he's checked back. On the other hand, he could have stuff like pocket 8s, which are easy fold for him, or just random garbage he's giving up, which actually have okay equity against us. 6 is versus pot size. We actually don't have to defend this hand here. Queen 8, I'm just going to go for value. We're just going to make a tight fold with the sixes. If he made it 3x, I would call there. But keep in mind, we don't just want to go around set mining with a pocket pair from every situation versus a raise from every situation. So for example, if under the gun opens and we're in MP, we should be cold calling 7s plus. We shouldn't just be cold calling stuff like pocket 2s from MP versus UTG open. It's not just about the position of the opener. In fact, it's more about our position than the position of the opener. So, you know, if under the gun opens and we have 2s on the button, then I would call with 2s, but I wouldn't call an MP because there's too many guys who can cold call, overcall, or squeeze behind us, etc. Jack 9, don't really have to open this. King 9, we're going to go for the ISO raise though. Okay, so this similar spot before, actually, like Jack 9 would often be in my default 3-betting range, but I'm actually just going to give it up here versus the pot size open. I don't think that's like a standard open sizing really in that spot, so I tend towards giving credit to pot size opens, but theoretically that's probably going to be a 3-bet in that spot. King 9 I ISO raise, but I get 2 callers, the board's ace 5-5. Okay, we can actually do something similar here where we just bet very small as a bluff, because you know, it's if this works, it's obviously amazing, and if someone calls, we haven't invested that much, and we may have some equity against their calling range. Like they could call us for something like you know, pocket 10s against that sizing, so I think it's completely fine just to bet very small there and narrow down the field. Ace king obviously going to be an open, so just going to check back here, hope to spike a king or a 9. So I think I'm just going to check down my king 9 high. I think it's a bit ambitious to try and fold a pair here, and it doesn't really look like I've got an ace if you think about the line I've taken. So just going to hope he has some random float and I end up winning. No, so see, I'm happy with the outcome. Whereas if I'd bet like 2/3 pot on the flop, then I wouldn't be happy with the outcome because it means I've invested too much money. Heslick says, don't we love an overcall to a set mine, but yes, folding will take, and good to hear. Yeah, definitely. I think really it comes down to we just look behind us, and if there's a huge fish in the blinds who will overcall, then that can be an argument to cold call our pairs wider if we anticipate an overcall from a fish. So yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. That's definitely true. Whereas I think that particular hand with the sixes, I think there was a guy behind me who had like 40 big blinds on the button. I think anyway, I can't remember exactly, but I think that influenced my decision as well to not defend the sixes there. Whereas if I checked behind and there was a guy who was clearly very, very bad and had a decent stack, then I would cold call with sixes there. So yeah, definitely you want to look behind. So you know, if there's fish behind you, you can expand your set mining range. If there's aggressive squeezes behind, then you can tighten your set mining range basically. Okay, so if this was a 3-way pot with the ace-5, I'd probably lead, but I think it's going to be ambitious in a 5-way pot, especially with all the draws that are available on something like a 9-8-5 board. So yeah, I think I'm just going to give up with the ace-5. Don't really see much point in continuing in this particular spot. King Jack, as we checked out RFI ranges earlier, we now know that this is you know, one of the bottom hands in our raise first in range from MP. Okay, so not a great flop. We don't really have any backdoors. I suppose we have a backdoor straight, but I think it's fine just to be check folding in this spot. Obviously we do actually want to have a check folding range. We don't just want to be c-betting everything. King is an interesting card. We have two options here. We can either value bet very thin, or we can go for a check. I think I'm going to stick with the theme of just underbetting for value in this spot. It's unlikely either player has an ace, and I don't want to give a free card in this texture. River. Okay, so I'm just gonna bet very thin. I mean, the reason why I'm betting so small is if you think about the hands we're targeting here, it's, you know, we're really targeting stuff like pocket 10s, 9x, 8x. So I think it's just better to bet really small. Here I'm gonna 3-bet if I don't time out. So again with the ace queen, like especially if he makes it 3x, again we have the argument that maybe it's not a value 3-bet and it's too strong to bluff with. We should be flatting. As we were talking about earlier, but I think the expectation of 3-betting is just way better than the expectation of flatting, so I'm just going to 3-bet basically. 7-4, we're going to continue with the trend of completing the small blind very wide and leading aggressively on the flop. Seems to be working very well this session so far. So obviously, as I say that, he's probably going to like raise me now or something. Okay, so we turn our open ender. That doesn't mean we have to bet. I'm going to bet though in this particular case. Ace queen. 9, 10, 6 is a really bad texture. I'm just going to check back, hope to spike on the turn. Although again, we can make a very small bluff at this pot if everyone checks. This guy leads. I think we're just not in a good spot here. I'm going to do something a little bit unorthodox. I'm going to just limp behind with the 8-9 here. As mentioned, we can occasionally do this. I don't really feel that happy about ISO raising this hand, especially seeing as guys have got short stacks. On the other hand, I really want to play this hand, given that there's like 3 fish. So I think this is like one of the exceptions where we can consider something that is often considered quite a fishy move. You know, obviously we don't like falling for 5 cents. I think our equity is just not there on this board though, so I'm going to fold despite the great pot odds we get. That's not the flop we were looking for generally. Okay, so King 6 of diamonds. Again, I think the price is too good, and then we've got the chance that these fishy guys may overcall. So again, I'm going to play another family pot. The thing with family pots is they're pretty bad for a red line actually, because we're just going to end up losing the pot most of the time. But they're good for our overall win rate, because when we do hit, then we're much more likely to get paid off if we hit something strong. So they're bad for the red line, they're good for the blue line, but they're good for the overall win rate, and obviously the main thing we're interested in is our overall win rate. So Queen 10, I don't think we have to c-bet Queen 10 here. I'm not the kind of guy who just automatically c-bets just because it's like a king high dry board. I think most people got over that concept like 2 to 3 years ago, that you don't just c-bet because the board's king high dry. You have to look at your own hole cards as well. And you know, there's no reason why we can't take stabs at this pot if he checks to us twice on the turn. But you know, if we're c-betting stuff like this, we're c-betting too frequently. You know, which might be okay if we've got a read on our opponent, but it's not going to be okay as a default strategy. So if you're one of these guys that just, you know, c-bets every time the board's king 7-2 rainbow, then I suggest that you seriously think about your strategy and what you're trying to achieve with that. Because the games don't play the same as they used to when someone came up with that concept of just always c-betting a king high dry board. Like, you can't do that anymore and get away with them. Not generally, I mean, you might get away with it at 5-0 snap. So this is the first time in the entire session that we've completed in the small blind and someone's actually raised us. King 4 is not in my limp calling range. We generally want something a bit more playable than this, so I'm just going to go ahead and limp fold. 10 jack, standard button open. Jack 6, standard UTG fold. So we've got about half an hour left, so keep the questions coming, guys. So hopefully this will be a weekly stream, taking place on Sunday at the same time. But as mentioned, I'm going to have to confirm the time with the Poker VIP guys, just to make sure this time's okay. But I can't really stream much later than this, so the advertised time of 7 PM UK time is going to be too late for me, unfortunately, because I'm +3 UK time at the moment, my current time zone. Once I'm back in the UK, then you know I can stream later, but for now it's going to be more like 3 PM UK time stream starting. But yeah, we will confirm this. But as mentioned, to those of you who have just got here, this is really just a trial stream. You know, we've looked at some raise first in ranges today, but we're gonna start with the more intensive strategy content from next time. So 2's here. I'm probably just gonna fold. Although keep in mind that when we cold call pocket pairs, I actually make pretty good bluff raises in position on the flop, so I wouldn't have too many issues with actually just raising here and barreling the turn. Again, it kind of ties in with the discussions we've been having about merging our bluff range. Like, it's a very merged hand to have. Jack 6, as I mentioned several times, if this gets checked down, I'm just going to lead the river, but so far it hasn't been checked down, like someone's always bet the turn. But if this guy checks back and this guy checks out of position on the river, I'm just going to bet any 2 cards in the river at these limits. So it's pretty good for the red line. So yeah, anyway, it's going to be a progressive course. Where, I mean, today we looked at RFI ranges. You know, next stream maybe we'll consider some cold calling ranges, etc. So it's going to be some strategy content combined with live play, i.e. this bankroll challenge we're doing now. We've started at 5-0, but hopefully, you know, we're going to slowly move up the limits so we can play some higher stakes games. And then also there's going to be hopefully included some one-on-one coaching that everyone can watch. So I mean, that could be like in the form of someone submits their database for review, and we review it in the session, or perhaps we can actually get them to call in here via Skype, etc. So I don't know exactly what kind of form that's going to take at the moment, but that's the general idea. It's going to be a mixture of live play, theory content, and also some one-on-one coaching. And also we'll probably have 1 or 2 competitions as well, like we'll probably have some quizzes and things. Okay, so we should probably just go ahead and c-bet with the flush draw in a multi-way pot, but heads up, we don't want to always c-bet flush draws. I mean, it's okay to c-bet most of the time, but we have to actually think about check calling and check raising some of our flush draws as a pre-flop aggressor from time to time. Again, the concept might be slightly lost at these limits, but you know, in reality, seeing as I don't think it will affect the EV in isolation that much, I'm going to be doing it because I think it gets us into good practice for the high limits. Ace-10 offsuit is probably fine to 3-bet. You probably want to play a mixed strategy of this hand, sometimes cold call, sometimes 3-bet in this particular spot. This texture, I mean, obviously the idea when we do defend the big blind pretty wide against button open is want to be check raising a ton of flops. I don't think this is quite the right flop to be check raising. You know, we're looking for backdoors and overcards or things like gut shots, etc. However, he checks back, and I think we can very easily state that he just doesn't have any overpair or usually any pair in this spot. So I'm just gonna go for a 2-barrel here. Ace King. You know, I'm always a little bit unhappy about these spots because, you know, I wonder if the average guy's 4-betting wide enough. But I'm just gonna rip it in here and hope to see, you know, like queens or something, or a fold. I think fold's the best case scenario actually when we jam Ace King here. Okay, so you know, I knew exactly what this guy was holding, but obviously that doesn't mean he's going to fold. Like, we'll review that hand actually. Let's sit out because we've got a few hands to review, and I also have a question in the chat which I'm going to get to. So Casclick says, or it doesn't look like a question, he says, you're the first guy I've heard speak VC betting, repping high dry boards. Good to hear, especially when c-betting too much is considered to be a big league and delayed c-bets work a ton. Yeah, there's certain really old poker concepts which, if we try and apply them in today's games, actually do us more harm than good. One of those is always c-bet a dry texture. It's like some of the worst advice that I can imagine actually these days. I mean, 5 years ago maybe it used to work, like maybe players were playing fit or fold on the flop. But these days, if you just c-bet every time there's a dry board and you're playing against a regular, he's going to be floating you with a pretty well constructed range if he's anywhere near decent. So if you just try and c-bet any time, you're just going to be donating money to his floats. And it becomes even worse if he starts adjusting to you and just floating everything on a dry texture. You're going to be losing a ton of money in that spot. So, you know, maybe it still works against some specific players, but trying to use such a strategy in general is just going to be like a really bad idea. You know, there's other pieces of advice as well which you know, really come from, you know, 4 to 5 years ago, but players are still trying to use them at the table. You know, advice such as, you know, bet big on drawy boards and bet small on dry textures. It's just not helpful advice. You know, it might even be correct in, you know, 51% of situations, for example. But you know, there's other 49% of the time when you shouldn't be using that kind of sizing strategy. You're just not maximizing your win rate. You know, there's spots where we'd be over betting a dry texture, and there's spots where we'd be under betting a drawy texture. Like, it's very important to deviate from some of the bad advice that originated 4 to 5 years ago. And the problem is, you will even still see some of this advice in like strategy content, strategy videos, articles. You'll still see guys advising players to do these things, and it's actually really bad advice in some situations. So, you know, it just goes to show it's really important to question everything you hear online. You know, for every piece of good advice online, there's going to be 10 pieces of bad advice. So that's why you should question everything. You should even question everything I'm saying. So don't assume that I know what I'm talking about. Perhaps I don't. So you have to take what I'm saying for what it's worth and analyze whether you think it's correct or not. And if you think it's correct, then great. But you know, don't just assume that when someone tells you something, it's actually accurate. Okay, so there's some hands we're going to just have a quick look at. Okay, let's see what they were. Okay, so I think it's good to talk about which hand was it? This hand where he double barreled. Was it on this table or the other one? And the guy makes a terrible call with ace-10. I think it is pretty terrible. Although maybe you disagree. You know, type in the chat if you think this is a good call and you think villain should have made this call. But I think it's a pretty bad call. Okay, so the idea is we cold call ace 10 here, and as mentioned, we could 3-bet pre-flop. That's fine. We can mix in some 3-bets with this hand, big blind versus button. Flop comes 6-3-5, and as mentioned, this is not really a good hand to put in that check raising range. We're going to have a pretty wide range in the spot because we are defending the big blind wide against the button open. So stuff we'd put in our check raising range. We're generally talking about some flush draws could go in there. Then stuff that has like overs and a backdoor or even a gut shot. So we're talking about stuff like 8-9 of spades or something like ace-jack of spades in this particular spot. You know, or even maybe something like ace-queen with the ace of diamonds, something like this. Obviously some of these hands can also go in a check calling range as well, so you know, don't think just because I said now we should check raise 8-9 of spades that means that it's wrong to check call 8-9 of spades. You know, if we actually play correctly, we'll probably find that we should, you know, check raise 8-9 of spades like, you know, 80% of the time and then check call at 20% or something like this. So you know, our range is properly well defended, and we have different types of hole cards in both our check raising range and our check calling range. You know, same with flush draws. If you have something like you know, ace queen of diamonds in the spot, which is going to be in our range, we should sometimes check raise that hand, but we should also sometimes check call that hand. If we just check raise it every time, that's not going to be a correct strategy. So basically hands can potentially belong in more than one range is what I'm getting at here. Either way, we've listed some of the hands that would be a good check raise here, or even potentially a check call, and ace 10 doesn't really cut it in the spot, so I'm going to go for a check fold. And keep in mind, equity is not the most important thing here, because you know, if we take something like 9-10 of spades for example, well, that actually has less equity than something like ace 10 offsuit does here, but I would much rather have 9-10 of spades in the spot. Despite it having less equity, the most important thing is playability and how many turn cards we improve on. So ace 10 doesn't really cut it in our defending range here. So we decided to check fold, however our opponent checks back. And just because we were going to check fold on the flop doesn't mean we should continue with that plan on the turn now that new information has come to light. So which new information are we talking about here? Well, I mean, if you think about players at your limit, and this is almost true universally actually regarding which limit you play, guys are just not really going to be slow playing that many value hands on this texture. It's so rare that someone would check back pocket 10s on this board texture. You know, I wonder if I've ever seen someone check back pocket 10s. In all the millions of hands I've played, I'm not sure I've ever seen someone check back 10s here. So any overpair is probably going to get bet. Any set is going to get bet. Straights are going to get bet because there's a flush draw out there. You know, two pair combo is going to get bet. Also, if our opponent has something like ace 5 of clubs, I think he should be betting. I think that's the best option. That doesn't mean I necessarily expect him to always bet with his hand, because I know that a lot of guys who I've, you know, watched them play, they'll just check back something like ace 5 of clubs on the flop and say it's because they have showdown value, but they can't extract value. I think very clearly the best option with ace 5 of clubs and ace 3 of clubs is to go ahead and bet the flop. So you know, if he's playing correctly, he doesn't have these hands either, but if he's not playing that well, he could have a pair of 5s potentially in the spot. So now that we've worked out which hands he's c-betting, we can see that his range really consists in this spot of, you know, random overcards that just don't like this texture. So you know, something like ace 10 of clubs for example, or even like 10 jack of clubs. He just doesn't want to c-bet this board texture because he's completely missed it. And even though we beat some of those hands, like we beat stuff like, you know, queen 10 suited for example, we also lose to some hands. We lose to ace jack, ace queen, and ace king specifically. But when we think about this board texture, there's absolutely no way he can call two streets for something like ace king. Because when you think about our range, we can have straights in our range. You know, we mentioned we're defending the big blind pretty wide against the button open. So he would be very foolish to think that he could call down two streets here with overcards. So that's exactly why we should two-barrel here. We kind of know what his range is. I mean, he could have maybe turned some, you know, spade draws. Maybe he has something like 10 jack of spades and doesn't realize he should be betting the flop with his backdoor flush. But assuming that the river's a brick, there's just no way that he can really be calling. I mean, as it happens, he does call, and this is going to happen some of the time. You know, I think when we see what he showed up with, I think that confirms a couple of things. Firstly, that confirms that our read was correct. Like he doesn't necessarily prove our read was correct, but this is one of the hands in his range that we put him on, so it's a good indicator that we're thinking along the right lines. And the only thing is we expect him to always fold this hand. So you know, if he does have ace jack here, then he's just going to call us down 2 streets and we're going to get owned. But I think it really doesn't matter, because I think the average player is nearly always folding 2 overcards and this board ran out, so it's going to be a very profitable spot for our red lion. I mean, as it happens, we chopped, which is, you know, probably a pretty good outcome for us when he's capable of calling down hands as weak as ace 10 high, because he can easily call ace jack or ace queen. I think it's a really bad cooldown by him, but that's also why I like the bluff in this spot, because I think he's nearly always folding this hand in the river. If we got to the river situation and he turned over his hand and said, hey, I have ace 10 of clubs, then I would still bet. Like, even if I saw his exact whole cards, I would bet the river here. But you know, I would just assume he's folding rather than calling. Okay, there was one other hand as well, which was the ace king, which it wasn't really that exciting, but I do think it's you know, interesting just to recap on what happened in that hand. Okay, so I mean, actually, it's a pretty standard situation, so it's not really going to be anything that exciting. Let's go back a couple of steps. Okay, so very simply, he open raises a button, we 3-bet ace king, he 4-bets. You know, it's actually pretty standard to jam here, so why are we talking about this hand? Just keep in mind that this is just not a great situation. That's all I wanted to say. Because even though we should probably never fold ace king here, there are some guys who are literally just 4-betting way too tight. So you know, if this guy had a 4-betting range of kings and aces only, then obviously it would actually be correct to fold ace king to his 4-bet, and some guys literally have a 4-bet range of kings and aces only. So especially when we're talking about the lower limits, it's always nicer if we have some kind of read that our opponent is capable of 4-betting light, because you will occasionally find a nit where the best option is either to flat pre-flop or to literally play 3-bet fold with ace king rather than 3-bet 5-bet, which seems super tight. But you know, it really depends what his range is. You know, if his range is only aces, then it should be a pretty obvious fold. But you know, I don't know this guy, and he's got you know, 40 big blinds in his stack, 80 big blinds in his stack even. So I'm not going to fold ace king here. I'm just going to jam. But what I'm essentially saying is, I'm not super happy about this spot. I'm not actually that excited about getting the money in here, because we'll be flipping or worse a decent chunk of the time. So Catholic says, happen to turn, do you fold to a big stack? Okay, so we can start folding ace king at like 120 big blinds deep, but when I say folding, I just mean not 5-betting, because what we can start doing is we can start flatting 4-bets potentially. You know, if we had 200 big blind stacks here, I wouldn't fold ace king, but I wouldn't like re-raise either. I think that's terrible, 200 big blinds deep. So I would consider flatting 4-bet out of position, but again, it really depends on the stats. You know, we could find an argument for folding with deep stacks out of position. Obviously, being out of position, the deep stacks favor the player who's in position, so the deep stacks are very bad for us when we have something like ace king. So yeah, potentially we can even 3-bet fold. In terms of the cutoff point for stacking off against an unknown, I would imagine it's somewhere around 120 big blinds. So you know, if your opponent's got 110 big blinds, then you know, fine, go ahead and stack off with ace king. If he's got more than 120, then auto stacking off with ace king in this spot is probably going to be very problematic. Probably going to be a slight losing play, or even a significant losing play, depending on our opponent's range. So keep in mind that you know, another thing that's changing about the games, and this is partly to do with the smaller bet sizings, is that players are flatting more 4-bets, because you know, in the past, if someone raises to 3 big blinds and someone 3-bets to 12 big blinds, and then someone 4-bets to 30 big blinds, then like flatting a 4-bet is you know, very questionable, because the stack to pot ratio setting up is going to be super low. So the way the games have changed now is, you know, someone min raises a button, someone makes it 7 big blinds as a 3-bet, we re-raise to like 15 big blinds. Now like 5-betting starts to become problematic, because you know, if we're just like jamming 100 big blinds over a 15 big blind 4-bet, well, firstly we're getting a terrible risk to reward ratio on our bluff, and you know, secondly our opponent knows that it's going to influence, you know, his range. I mean, it's not that hard for him to actually just fold a ton to our jam and just call us off with premiums, given like the bad risk to reward ratio we're giving ourselves. So you know, 5-betting becomes problematic. So we could start thinking about min 5-betting, but again, this has like big mathematical holes, and you know, having a 5-bet fold range 100 big blinds deep is very likely mathematically unsound unless you have an exploitative reason for doing it. So that basically leaves flatting 4-bets. So you know, there's some schools of thought that say, you know, facing like a 15 big blind 4-bet, we should actually just be having a flat only range. Like, we should flat our aces and kings to protect the rest of the range, and we should, you know, flat a 4-bet with a bunch of other stuff. So keep in mind that becomes an option now as well. Like, we don't have to auto stack off with ace king, especially against a small 4-bet where our risk to reward ratio is not very good. We can think about just flattening out a position and playing post flop. This is especially effective if we know our opponent has a wide polarized 4-betting range. Obviously it's not effective if he has a pretty tight 4-betting range, basically. Okay, so Llama Super User 123 says, when playing 250 big blinds deep, do you have a 4-betting range? And you put, I don't. I try to keep my range uncapped. Yeah, I mean, I think actually, I think this really depends on position, and there's going to be a number of different opinions on this particular topic because it's not widely discussed. But if we just think about 3-betting for a minute, there's a school of thought that says, you know, we shouldn't really 3-bet that much out of position when the stacks get very deep, because generally speaking, the deep stacks are always going to favour the player in position. So, you know, if we're very deep and we're in position, then we have an argument for actually having, you know, a reasonable 4-bet range potentially. Whereas if we're out of position, then we have an argument for actually not having a 4-bet range, because it just doesn't make sense to bloat the pot out of position when the stacks are deep, and the advantage clearly belongs to the player who has position. So I'd say that's going to be the main answer. Is I'd say it depends on position. And I'd say you don't have to have a 4-betting range deep while out of position, whereas you potentially should have a 4-betting range while deep when you're in position. And, you know, exploitatively, there's always going to be reasons for doing things. You know, if, for example, you were deep and your opponent played a strategy where he either played 5-bet or fold, there's certain hands which are going to be super problematic to go ahead and 4-bet, because we can only really 4-bet hands which we're either willing to stack off with or are an easy fold versus a 5-bet. Whereas, if you know your opponent likes to flat a ton of 4-bets out of position, then we can start playing exploitatively. You know, maybe he folds for a ton of flop c-bets and 4-bet pots. I mean, that's one thing that players should have these days, is they should have a pop-up which is specific for how players play in 4-bet pots, because 4-bet pots are becoming more common. So, you know, if you see your opponent's folding, you know, very often to c-bets and 4-bet pots, then yeah, of course we should have you know, a 4-betting range if our opponent has a tendency to call a bunch of 4-bets. You know, as default, I would stick to saying that, you know, we should not necessarily have a 4-bet range out of position, but we should have one in position potentially. But that doesn't mean it's wrong to not have a 4-betting range deep while in position. I have one, but you know, that doesn't mean like I can categorically state that you know, it's wrong to not have a 4-betting range when deep. So yeah, I have one in position, don't really have one out of position. That's how I approach it by default. But you know, if you wanted to say that you never have a 4-betting range while deep, that's fine. I mean, other dynamics come into play as well, because you know, even though we've said that, you know, we can't 5-bet fold 100 big blinds deep, it's mathematically unsound, we can potentially start thinking about having a 5-bet fold range when we're super deep. So you know, it all comes down to whether we want to, you know, explore that dynamic and, you know, let our opponents 5-bet us and maybe 5-bet them, whereas perhaps we prefer just playing a 4-bet pot. So you know, it depends to an extent on where you put the work in your game and where you feel more comfortable, because I don't think there's like I don't think there's a GTO answer to that question at this stage. I don't think it's like correct to say that we should or shouldn't have a 4-betting range in that spot. So hopefully that answers your questions. If you need clarification on that, then please post further questions. In the meantime, I'm going to head back to the tables for about 10 minutes. Then we'll probably call it a session. So a6 suited, fine to 3-bet here. I'm not going to 3-bet because there's fishy guys in the blinds. Besides, my default range in this spot would usually be you know, ace2 to ace5 for 3-betting, you know, stuff like ace-jack offsuit, king-queen offsuit. However, you know, there's actually an argument for calling here, because you know, there's two fishy guys in the blinds. So you know, that's what I'm going to do in this spot. I think it's very wide from a default point of view, but I think we might be able to make it profitable in this spot because of the fishy guys. I'm just going to give up on this flop. Not really the flop I'm looking for. I don't have any problems with that. A lot of the value in that hand was hoping that the weaker players tagged along, which they didn't. So I don't have a big issue with just giving up there on the flop. Okay, so looks like I mean, I know we get great odds in the big blind, but not going to defend the 7-2 here. Just going to put it in my folding range. Same with the 2-5 of clubs. Standard folds on both tables. So play for another 10 minutes or so, then we'll call it a session. So if you have any additional questions, please post them now. And it can be about anything, it doesn't have to be specifically about 6 max poker, although that's the main thing that I'm good at talking about. So if you ask me about something that's not related to poker, then I may struggle to find an answer. So nines, standard open. Let's check this guy's stack size, 345. You know, actually 10-9-5 is one of those deceptively drawy boards. Like, it looks like it's dry because it's rainbow. It's actually a lot drier than it looks. If you think about the sheer amount of gut shots and straight draws that are available, you know, even 2-pair stuff potentially, although we blocked that with our set of nines there. So we definitely don't want to be slow playing in that spot too much, basically. 10-9, I didn't open this hand earlier in the session. But keep in mind, that doesn't necessarily mean that my strategy is erratic and it's varying wildly. It just means that some hands I open a certain percentage but don't always open them. It depends who's at the 10-9 is not part of my standard cutoff opening range, but I will occasionally open it. So we were generally completing pretty wide in the small blind this session. I'm not going to complete 2-3 offsuit, but I'm going to complete pretty wide. This guy limps, so I'm going to go for the ISO raise here from the big blinds, and probably give him a tag as well. 6-4 offsuit, however, might quite cut it. It might just about cut it for these limits, though. For small blind complete, we'll see what the button does. He raises, so obviously we're just going to give up on this hand. So actually, assuming there's a limper, we can actually complete really wide in the small blind, especially if you know, there's a fishy guy behind, for example, or more than one guy limps. King 3, these guys could easily just both be regs, have 4 stacks, and King 3 is not part of my standard button RFI range, so I'm just going to fold in this case. A6 of hearts. I think it's actually okay to sometimes complete with these hands. It is part of my standard RFI range, but you know, partly based on the guy's stacks. So limp pot with flop top pair. Probably going to bet in this spot. Although it's a dry texture, it's like hard for him to have too many hands he's calling with. So there is an argument for checking in that spot. Here with the A6, I'm just going to bet for value. Probably have like 2 streets against the worst pair or a draw, for example. Then we'll make a decision on the river. Queen 6, it's like bottom of my opening range. I think it's not actually an open, I think it's just outside my standard range, so it really depends on the players behind. We'll open it now, but it's fishy guy on the button, although keep in mind that generally if we are targeting fish, we would prefer that we have position on them. Even if they're fish, like, position is a huge advantage in this game, so even if it's a weaker player, we'd actually rather have position on them. 8's here. I mean, this guy check called the flop. I think he's probably 3-betting at least jacks plus, so that leaves him with like 9s and 10s. We can also have some floats. He could have some flush draws. He could have some worse pocket pairs. You know, so we have to just bet here. River is interesting. I think this is a kind of spot which really comes down to combinatorics and. You know, 5s, 6s, 7s is obviously like 18 combos, and then 9s and 10s is like 12 combos. But then again, he also could potentially have some stuff like 4s that he's slow playing. I'm just going to check back here. And then also he has a whole bunch of like busted draws and stuff, which obviously don't count into our combo calculation because we're assuming he's check folding those. But let's just say it's like really close to being like probably 50-50 in terms of combos in that particular spot. So it's like. You know, obviously for a value bet to be profitable, we need over 50% equity against our opponent's calling range. So specifically on the river, that translates to over 50% of the combos he calls with need to be worse hands, because obviously on the river we either have 100% or 0% equity. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a combinatoric spot, like without question. Like the answer to that you find by counting combos, because he clearly has some better hands and he clearly has some worse hands. But the question regarding whether we can value bet is, does he have over 50% worse hands? And the only way you can really solve that spot is to count combos. So if you don't know how to count combos, then you're gonna struggle in some river situations, basically. So if you don't know, for example, how many combos of ace king there are on a king 7-2 board, or how many combos of pocket twos there are on the same board, then you're going to struggle at making those close decisions, because what's your thought process is going to be like, well, he has some flush draws and he has some top pairs and he has some sets, so wait, should I value bet? Whereas if you can say, like he has 20 combos of a certain hand and 40 combos of another hand, then you can ask the question very specifically, should I value bet in this spot? So I think combinatorics is often overlooked, actually. I think a lot of the limit hold'em guys seem to make good use of that. Where edges are smaller, but I think when it comes to no limit hold'em, because edges are generally a lot bigger if you're a good player, like it's easy to overlook something like combinatorics and just not include it as part of your decision making process, because if you're having a huge win rate over your opponents, you might not see the need to fine tune certain of your decisions to make them as effective as possible. But certainly if you've never thought about individual combos of hands, then certainly for the high limit games, that's something that you really want to think about. Ideally in every situation, especially if you're playing like live or something and you have time to calculate this stuff, you should be thinking about how many combos your opponent has of like every hand in his range. That's how you make the most brutally accurate decisions. Tens, I'm just going to go for 3-bet for value. Pretty small ISO. I just have to be a little bit careful here because this guy's stack size is like pretty awkward if he jams. I still think it's a pretty good spot in position with tens. 5-6 suited, just gonna cold call in position. As mentioned, I like calling this speculative stuff in position. Okay, so another great spot to underbet the flop. If we bet big here, we lose too much money to Jack X hands. If you've never seen this kind of thing before, it could just look potentially very fishy, but I assure you it's actually pretty decent. Okay, 5-6, we're just going to call the flop here. I don't like to raise too many of these like weak flush combos. The 10's an interesting card because like it puts some hands in his range you could potentially use as check calls on the turn. It's a little bit tricky. I mean, normally I bet here, I'm just not 100% sure about the 10 because we're talking like stuff like ace 10, 9, 10, etc. I'm just going to check back rails my equity and then think about bluffing the river potentially. Like this is a nice river to bluff. I was going to fold and watch the 10s. I think facing a raise, I'm beat there most of the time. I'm just going to go for an overbet on the river here with the 5-6 and try and fold out like 10x hands and stuff. It does look a little bit suspicious if you actually stop and thinks about my line, like why would I be overbetting here? Although there is like some school of thought that I would be overbetting a flush because like he's never folding a 9x, that kind of thing. I honestly think it's kind of hard to call here if he doesn't have a 9, and I don't think he has that many flushes because I think he'd be leading the river. So I think hopefully he folds his entire range, it's not a 9x. That's like the idea here. I mean, we'll see what happens. Like I'll be a bit disappointed if I get called by like ace 10 or something. Because like this bet is designed to fold out stuff like ace 10, so it means that fundamentally my decision is not correct against this guy if he calls with a 10x. But you see, I don't think that's a great spot to bet the turn. And just keep in mind as well that even though like when opponent checks to us on the turn after he bets a flop, it's usually a good bluff spot. If we're playing a correct strategy, we shouldn't fire all of our bluffs on the turn in that spot because our turn betting range becomes too air heavy in that spot, which is not going to be correct. Okay, so Llama Super User 123 says, what do you think the optimal c-bet percent is in 3-bet pots? Just wondering on your opinion. I think it's going to be somewhere around the 60% mark. Maybe 65% is a good exploitative value. Maybe 55% is game theory correct or something. So somewhere around there is good. Also, that's an average value, and we should probably be c-betting more in position, slightly less out position, and out position we can focus a bit more of our attention on defending our checking ranges. Like I think out of position it's a lot more important to have good check calling and check raising fundamental strategy, whereas in position we can just bet a lot more of our continuing range rather than checking back and giving a free card. I think ace 8 offsuit here is pretty marginal given the guy's stack size, but I'm gonna raise it anyway. So yeah, you know, 55% is possibly game theory value, like 65% is probably a good exploitative value for most limits. I think a lot of regs c-bet too much in 3-bet pots. I think if you know, if I have flop c-bet and 3-bet pot starts becoming 80-90%, I think you know, that strategy is gone too far. You know, out of control. So we ISO raise this guy. He check calls on 7-4-6. You know, I'm tempted to barrel just because I have like ace high, and you know, he could have some like 5x hands, some diamond draws. I'm just going to check back here though and hope to spike in, you know, an ace or an 8 or a 5 or something. Sixes. Okay, it's an interesting spot. So he just floats the flop and then he checks back turn. Kind of looks like, you know, maybe pocket 8s or something, like a 7x. Although you should probably bet those hands on the turn. So I'm actually just going to check for the sixes, but I'm hoping he checks back with some kind of busted draw or something. I don't think I can profitably check call in this spot. Although it could potentially be a good bluff card for him, but you know, I like to assume players don't know that at this limit. Okay, so Jack 6. Okay, we check back in the big blind. I think flop comes King 10-8. He checks back the flop, so I'm just gonna go for an automatic lead on the turn here. Turn calling range. I guess he could have some 10x hands. This guy's got the donkey tag, so I'm a little bit worried about 2-barrel bluffing him because he might bet some of his draws on the turn, on the flop, even like Queen Jack. So I don't know if he actually has stuff like Jack 9, Queen Jack. It looks kind of more like he has a 10x. And I think if I want to fight at 10x, I have to overbet here, and even then, I don't rate my chances that highly against this player. So I think check fold river's fine, and I don't even know if he'd value bet at 10. He might check it back, for example. So yeah, if he's bluffing me, good for him, but I don't really think he has that many bluffs. I think he bets a lot of his straight draws on the flop, so I think it's fine. Should just go for a check fold there. Okay, so I'm gonna be sitting out next big blind on the tables. So apologies if you came expecting the stream to be at 6 PM UK time. Unfortunately, that's not possible for me to do the stream at that time, so it's going to hopefully be about 3 hours earlier than it was planned for originally. So we've looked at some RFI ranges today, but hopefully next session we're going to be looking, you know, maybe at some cold calling ranges and 3-betting ranges. So we'll start off with getting the pre-flop fundamentals very good. Then we'll progress out to flop play, then turn play, then river play. We'll also like explore some concepts which are not related to any particular street. You know, for example, things like where ahead, where behind situations, slow playing. You know, we'll also at some point move on to like GTO concepts, like you know, how to construct bluff to value ranges, that kind of thing. You know, how to have you know, unexploitative defense, how to have unexploitative aggression, like how to balance our, you know, bluffing ranges on the river, for example. We'll talk about stuff like this. We'll also talk about some concepts which are not generally covered in a lot of 6-max courses, which include things like how to play with 50 big blind stacks. A lot of guys who play 100 big blinds don't know really how to play very well with 50 big blind stacks or lower. We'll also talk a bit about how to play with deep stacks. Also, you know, talk about things like how to play in 3-bet pots, 4-bet pots, that kind of stuff. And we'll cover some basic maths as well. We'll talk about EV calculations. We'll also try out some of the various software that's available. You know, we'll do some more detailed work with Flopzilla. We'll do some work with Card Runners EV. So like, there's a huge amount planned for this course. So you know, if you manage to follow it from the beginning, you know, until, you know, quite a few sessions down the line, then hopefully it should really improve your 6-max fundamentals. Okay, so this final hand, one thing I don't really do too much of the time is when I do ISO a guy, I don't really 2-barrel bluff that much. If he does check call the flop, usually indicates he's interested in the pot and doesn't have much of a check folding range on the turn. Although, as mentioned, it can be okay to somewhat go for a 2-barrel with a slightly merged range, but I think ace 9 obviously doesn't cut it here. Anyway, he leads the turn, so I think it's a pretty standard fold in this spot. Okay, and I guess I don't know if we actually made money in that second session. Yeah, we did. So we started at $70, and we're now up to 82.97. So we're up, 2.5 stacks, which is okay for the session, I guess. I'm not sure how many hands we played, but it's always nice to be in the green. Not that it really matters over the course of one session, obviously. A large part of winnings could end up being down to variance over the course of 500 hands or 1,000 hands, however many hands we played today. I'm not sure. Okay, so I guess we'll call it a stream today. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and hopefully when people know what time the stream is, we'll have more traffic next time, more guys watching, because I don't even know how you guys actually found the stream. You must have literally been refreshing the Twitch page or 2+2 page or whatever it is to realize the stream was running. So congratulations if you were one of the first in the stream. You must seriously like spending time on your computer, so congratulations for that. But yeah, hopefully when everyone knows what the time is for the next stream, hopefully we'll have a bit more traffic so we can get a bit more discussion going as well. So if you have any feedback as well, then just let me know. Bring your feedback to the session. I'm not sure if there's like comments here on Twitch or anything. I've not actually streamed on Twitch before, so I don't know if there's like a comment section you can put, but I'm interested in hearing your feedback and what you'd like to see in future streams, etc. Although we do have a pretty good plan laid out that should be progressive and improve your 6max game. Great, so thanks very much everyone for watching the stream, and hopefully I will see you here next week at 3 p.m. UK time, so 3 p.m. GMT time is hopefully when the stream will be, although I can't say that 100% for certain at this stage. So thanks very much for watching, and good luck at the tables.